Hi everyone, it's Renee with Delaney Jane Cards. Welcome back to my channel. Today I have a card using a very feminine stamp set, and I'm going to make a very masculine card with it. I pulled out this stamp set called Celebrate Tile. This is a Birch Press Designs stamp set. It's got this gorgeous background and a bunch of sentiments. Then I also grabbed the Memory Box Tool Shed embossing folder. The Memory Box, what's this one called? Garland, Stripes, and Dots. And I guess that's kind of a Christmas pattern paper, but I pulled out the brown polka dot one. It has stripes on one side and polka dots on the other, and then I did emboss it with that tool shed embossing folder, and then I pulled it out and I put it back in. The white powder you see on there is my anti-static powder. Just figured I'd get a head start on that. So here I'm inking the part that's going to go into the embossed area with my Versamark ink. This is going to put that sticky ink down into the debossing, and I did run it through my machine again just to, make sure that it pressed all the way. And now I'm going to sprinkle on some silver embossing powder. I know, kind of weird, right? Because I used that ink pad on the actual folder, this is not going to be perfect, and I think it kind of adds to the effect a little bit. There is some silver embossing powder where it probably doesn't need to be, but well, it wasn't coming off. It's super humid here, and that Versamark ink kind of grabs any embossing powder. And anyway, I just left it the way it is. I did make a mess with my silver embossing powder. It drives me nuts. Ugh, hate that. Anyway, I tried to tab off just a little bit more, and it didn't really move too much more, but I thought, well, good enough. It looks super masculine. And then I did zoom in here so that you can watch this embossing powder melt. And as many times as I have melted embossing powder, it's always super cool and fun. My stepson calls it magic. He thinks it's one of the coolest things ever, and I don't think he's wrong. So here I was just heating up all that embossing powder that is down in the debossed areas of this embossing folder impression. And then, there's some of the background. Here you can see the difference between the debossed side and the embossed side. And then this is shiny paper. This is the polished foil pad by Memory Box, and you can see it was very shiny. I had to leave it in because I thought it was super silly. I want to show you that you don't have to have this stuff be that shiny. Okay, so here we're using that background stamp, that very feminine, looks like a tile that you put like in your kitchen. I can imagine this like with blue on white. It's probably gorgeous. But my first step here was anti-static embossing powder on this shiny strip, and then I used my Versamark ink and I pressed my paper to the stamp. Now I'm pouring on gunmetal embossing powder, and I'm going to emboss that on this polished foil cardstock. This stuff takes embossing so well. Not only heat embossing, but dry embossing as well. It's great stuff. It's definitely durable enough to handle these types of techniques. So here I used the Celebrate word that is in the stamp set, and I'm going to stamp that in Versamark ink over top. I used my anti-static powder tool again, and now I'm going to emboss that with black embossing powder. So we're kind of layering embossing powders here. We are going to layer a few more because we don't want this to be like shiny. We want it to look like it came out of Dad's garage. So after I had that done, now I am going to clean up my mess because we don't want black embossing powder spilled anywhere. Now I'm going to use copper embossing powder, and I'm going to add a little bit of rust to this panel. I thought that it would be kind of a neat addition to have a little bit of rust, and copper is pretty close to rust. So I'm just taking this large Versamark ink pad and I'm just tapping it on in some areas. Just want to add a little bit more interest. Now it is not everywhere, it's only in some areas. Some of it's going to layer over top of that original gunmetal embossing that we did. Some of it's over top just the glossy paper. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to heat set this. Now this paper is very thin, so if you need to, set it down on your mat or however you like to heat emboss, this is, it stays hot a little bit longer and it is kind of flimsy. So just keep an eye on it, keep that in mind when you're doing this. And then I wanted just a little bit more. So I did touch some more Versamark ink on there and added just a little bit more embossing powder, and I'm going to go ahead and heat set that. Now, this is looking pretty grungy, pretty cool, but it's still really shiny in the background. So I pulled out my small Versamark ink pad here, just because it was easier for me to see if I had solid coverage all over. And I'm going to use this dull matte embossing powder by Wow. Comes in this giant container, which is super nice if you're going to do like big techniques. It lasts forever. I've had it forever and ever and ever, and it is kind of one of my favorites. It adds this really cool look about it. So when you first melt it, it is shiny, and then as it cools down, it will go to matte, and you can clearly see it in these video clips. And I left them in particularly because I've never actually watched in anyone else's video the embossing powder go to matte. Did you see it there? It was so neat. So after I did that, I trimmed that piece down, and I trimmed some black cardstock down, one just slightly larger than the background, and then one just slightly wider than the Celebrate strip, so that I could frame that all. And then I ran my scissors along the edge. I did a little bit of distressing. Like I said, I want this to be as masculine as possible, and I didn't want to really pull in too much other stuff. So this is what I did. So first I layered my strip on this piece of black. I just want a border of black on the top and the bottom because I don't want this sentiment strip, basically it's just a really big sentiment strip. Don't want it getting lost in that background because it is super busy with all the tools and the heat embossing and the dry debossing. It's very busy, but it's very masculine. So I am going to go ahead and just mount that on there. Kind of it frames out the edges, and then I do have this other little sub sentiment from the stamp set that I will be stamping and just kind of getting an idea of where I want to lay that out. I did add lots and lots of ATG adhesive here just to make sure that it's going to stay adhered to this card, and I used my mat to kind of straighten it up or like lay it down so it was straight. I'm not sure if it's straight, but you know what? It's a handmade card. I even like tried to lay it back down, and there is something about this glass mat that kind of tricks my eyes a little bit sometimes because there's depth to it, and I struggle sometimes getting things straight with it. But that's a me thing. So here's my little sub sentiment, and I did decide to stamp that on some craft cardstock. You'll see I did stamp it in black, and then I also tried to stamp it and emboss it in the copper, and I trimmed them both out, and I wanted to see which one would look better. The black one. Oh, maybe I did trim. Maybe I got rid of that part of the video, but I had held them both up there, and I just preferred the one that was just black on there. So I'm going to go ahead and adhere my card front to this black piece of cardstock. I did add lots of ATG. You'll see that I take my time to go across the very bottom of the card front a little bit later, and I will explain that in a minute. But here I'm just popping up this sentiment strip. It says celebrate and enjoy your day. I just thought perfect for Father's Day, for any celebration, birthday, graduation, anything. Maybe he got a promotion at work, and it's a really good one. So here, I don't have those fancy corners that go into my MISTI to line things up well, but I use my bar magnet a lot. I will line up my sentiment and then just move my bar magnet out of the way slightly so that it's not in my way. I just stamped "You Deserve It" on the inside of my card base and figured that was plenty on this masculine card. I'm going to go ahead and just reinforce my fold on my card base, and I make mine out of some inexpensive cardstock that I find locally. And then I was just making sure I was happy with the card front. Now, when I go to put this on, I made sure that I put a lot of ATG on, and then I focused very much on this bottom edge. Okay, so when I give my husband a card, every time I show him a card, it's almost like he tries to pick it off the card base. I know he doesn't do it on purpose, but I think it's a man thing. Like, let's see how this goes together or comes apart. So I figured a little extra ATG on the bottom would keep it stuck together, and then there would be no questions. So that's my card. Make sure you check out the links I have below. They will be for the stamp set, which is super cool and can be used in so many different ways. It will be for the embossing folder, all the paper, all the good stuff. And stop by the blog post below. It will be linked to the Birch Press Designs blog. And as I always say, give cards generously. Bye.